parents and teachers. I'm going to demonstrate the most common gestural cues that I use for my students who have difficulty producing speech sounds. A gestural cue is just a hand signal that I use that highlights a specific feature of a sound and should help remind the student how to make the sound correctly. So as we know, each sound has a specific place where the lips and tongue need to be to produce the sound. We also need to think about managing the airflow. Is it an explosion type of sound, or is it a long sound with continuous airflow? And lastly, we need to think about if the voice is on or off during the sound production. So there's a lot of things to think about. The most common speech sound errors happen on the s, k, g, o, ch, sh, and dropping final sounds off of words, so saying cat instead of cat, or difficulty with multisyllabic words where you might drop a syllable out of a multisyllabic word and say pewter instead of computer. So I'm going to put a little cue over here so that way you know what sound I'm talking about and the gestural cue that matches it in case you need to fast forward through this video and you don't want to watch the whole thing. So the first sound I'm going to talk about is the s sound right there. We know that to make the s sound, our tongue needs to be pushing up on the roof of the mouth right behind the teeth. So there's a bumpy pad in the mouth right behind the teeth. You got to push up on that. And S has a lot of airflow coming out. Some students will stop it, and instead of saying the word sun, they'll say ton. So the cue I use for that is taking my pointer finger, crossing my body, and then dragging it across to make sure that they understand there's lots of airflow coming out when they do the sun sound. The next sound I'm going to talk about is the sound. So to make the sound, the child needs to think about putting their tongue all the way in the back of the mouth. Think about almost trying to swallow your tongue. So there are two ways to make the sound. One way, your tongue is bunched in the back of your mouth, and the other way, the tongue is flipped in the back of the mouth. So it could be or it could be like that. Either way, it needs to be back all the way. So the cue I use for this is I take my two fingers and put them here towards the back of the mouth and pretend that they're making a line go all the way through my mouth and that the tongue needs to touch that line. And I usually flip my tongue back, so that's the way that I do it to make the sound. So that's the first thing that they do. So this is one of the parts of the cue that I do. And then the second thing is to make sure they smile, because if they don't smile, sometimes they'll say wabbit. See how my lips were rounded there instead of in a smile for rabbit. So I think about tongue back and smile for my R cue. The next cue we're going to go over is for the k and g sounds. So for both of those sounds, the tongue is in this position all the way in the back of the mouth with the tongue tipped down. To make the cue, I do a V with my fingers and I put them on my throat like this to remind the child that the sound needs to come from the very back here for k, g. If they don't keep their tongue tipped down, then they're going to say t and d. So they got to remember to keep the tongue tipped down. Sometimes I have them keep their mouth open as they do it as well for k, g. The only other difference between the k and g sounds is that if you take your hand and put it on your throat here as you do g, 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 you'll feel a vibration. If you do the same thing for k, 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 you'll feel no vibration. So for g, your voice is on, and for k, your voice is off. The next sound cue we're going to do is for the O sound. So for that sound, I make my fingers into an L sound and talk about this finger pointing up to remind them that their tongue needs to go up onto those bumps right behind the teeth on the top of the roof of the mouth. So they got to put their tongue up there, oh, and then I usually will just put it here really close to the front of the mouth because the sound is coming from the front, and remind them to put their tongue up, oh. The next cue I'm going to talk about is for the ch sound. So for the ch sound, the tongue is towards the middle of the mouth. It can't be all the way forward. So think about to the middle or the back, and then it is an explosion type of sound. So the air is coming out short, sharp, and fast. So I make a fist with my hand and then explode it like this as I do. I'll also talk to the child about thinking about a sneeze when you go, choo, and see if they can get that really short, sharp, hard, and fast sound coming out with their tongue towards the middle of the mouth there for ch. The next cue I'm going to talk about is for the sh sound. So for the sh sound, the tongue is also near the middle of the mouth. If their tongue comes too far forward, they're going to make a s sound. And then we also want to think about holding the air out for a long time because there's a lot of airflow for that one. So I kind of use two different cues for the sh, since this is common for making that sound. When we want to tell people to be quiet, I tell them to think about that. Shh. And then I also will use this hand cue. It's similar to the S because the sound is long, but to make it a little bit different, I will wiggle my finger as I do it because it has a little bit more noise than the S sound is really clear, and the sh sound is kind of like this. So we'll say something like ship, right, as we do our sh sound and hold it out. The next thing I'm going to talk about is for final consonant deletion, which is exactly what it says. That's where the student takes the last sound off of the word. And so instead of saying the word cat, they just might say ca. So to help them make sure that they think about getting that final sound on there, I kind of will close the word with a little pinch like this, and we'll say cat and close it nice and hard and sharp, just like that. Next, I'm going to talk about a cue for your multisyllabic words. So those are words with many syllables like computer or cafeteria. So I will tap out each syllable on my fingers, and you just want to make sure that you are clearly tapping each syllable. So instead of saying cafeteria, I just got to 3 taps that time, which it's not because it's 5. You want to make sure that it's super clear and deliberate. Cafeteria, right? So you could tap on your fingers like this. You could tap them on your chin, cafeteria. You could stomp them out on the ground, but either way, you just want to make sure that it's 1 syllable per movement so that it's really clear and that they get all the sounds in their word. Lastly, I'm going to talk about voicing. So we have a little test we can do to tell if the voice is on or off. If it's on, you'll feel a vibration in your throat, and if it's off, you won't. So I'm going to have you take your hand, put it on your throat, and we're going to go g, d, z. So for all of those, I feel a vibration or a little tickle here. So that means the voice was on. Now I'm going to have the same thing, put my hand on my throat and do k, t, s. I felt nothing in my throat, no tickle or vibration, so that means the voice was off. So improving speech sounds has a lot to do with increasing awareness and education, and using gestural cues is a great way to help support your student or child as they work to master their speech sounds.